There are a lot of food companies and food organizations that have a lot to say in what goes on in the food world. And let me be honest here, their main goal is to make money, not promote health. Let's look into dairy politics just as an example of how this works. I know that that's not mentioned in the word of wisdom, but there's a lot like this. Now, we are taught in school and through other means to stay away from saturated fat because it causes weight gain, it promotes heart disease and other health issues. And cheese is the number one source of saturated fat in the diet. Beef is next, and third is milk. Yet, when we talk about reducing our saturated fat intake, reducing beef intake is usually the only thing mentioned. Cheese or milk, they're almost never mentioned. Now, why is this? There was a campaign launched by the global dairy industry to neutralize the negative image of milk fat among regulators and health professionals as related to heart disease. This campaign is actually still in force and still promotes non-harmful associations between dairy products and heart disease and death, even in scientific studies. Crazy. Now, we know this because many scientific journals will ask that the studies published show any conflicts of interest, such as who might be paying for this study. Now, this is an example of a study that looked at the data from 29 studies and found that there was no association between eating cheese and getting heart disease. Often in studies, though, they will state that there is no conflict of interest. Take this study, for example. At the bottom here, it states that all of the study authors have no conflict of interest. But if you look at the affiliations, 3 of the study authors happen to be employed by China's biggest dairy company, one of the world's largest dairy companies, the Yili Group. In the United States, we have what are called dairy checkoff programs. These were established in 1983. These checkoff programs focus on increasing sales and growing the demand of dairy through partnerships. Now, this probably wasn't such a big deal in the beginning, as the money was never meant to go to lobbyists, but the USDA seems to have just thrown all of that out the window and gives millions of dollars each year to lobbyists. How much? We don't really know, because you see, the law that established the dairy checkoff required the USDA, to submit yearly audits to Congress, but they haven't submitted them for years. So we don't really know. Now, there's the Dairy Board as well, which is the official checkoff organization, and it has contracts with Dairy Management Incorporated. This is a lobbying organization. In 2021, the Dairy Board gave $110 million in checkoff dollars to the Dairy Management Company. DMI, as we'll call it, has in turn given that money to large corporations to help promote dairy in products, such as McDonald's, which actually has 6 dedicated dairy checkoff employees at their headquarters who basically just sit around and decide how to get more dairy into McDonald's products. Literally, that's their job. Same with Taco Bell. They're part of the dairy checkoff program. When they introduced their double steak quesadillas and cheese shreds, it resulted in a 4% increase in their dairy sales. Pizza Hut was able to develop a 3-cheese stuffed crust pizza. See how they really just try to shove cheese everywhere they can? The dairy industry is also working hand in hand with school districts to create what they call healthy, viable options for students. In 2011, the Dairy Board partnered with Domino's Pizza to develop a line of kid approved pizzas that use light and reduced sodium ingredients. The Smart Slice school program brought this new pizza to more than 2,000 schools thanks to these dairy checkoff programs. When asked how this worked, the DMI said, "We worked with Domino's Pizza to go in and reduce the total fat and sodium and increase the amount of cheese used." Okay, if cheese is the number one source of saturated fat, how do you reduce the total amount of fat while increasing the number one product that contributes to fat in the diet? That just doesn't sound very smart to me. So yes, in addition to having large corporations to help out the dairy industry, a big problem is that people just aren't consuming as many dairy products as they used to. There are now alternatives that are healthier, and research shows that the upcoming generations they don't like milk like generations from the past. This has made it really hard for dairy farmers to sell their product. So, what do these farmers do? They ask the USDA to help them out. Every year, the USDA buys up millions of dollars of milk from farmers and literally just pours it down the drain. Either that or they find a way to get it into us through 3 cheese stuffed crust pizzas and, Smart Slice, Domino's school lunch programs. And part of getting that into us is through advertisement. You've seen the commercials on TV that say things like "Behold the power of cheese," or the Got Milk advertisements in magazines. Excuse me. They'll even say things like chocolate milk has muscle in order to defend chocolate milk. The government is pushing this stuff on our kids through the school lunch program. In fact, dairy is the only food required by government to be on each student's plate. When my children used to get school lunch, even though they hate milk, they were required to take a milk every single time, even though it just ended up in the garbage. And here's the craziest thing about that. 11% of all sugar goes into dairy products. In fact, True Moo, which is sold in schools to children, has 21 grams of sugar in its strawberry milk. 70% of all milk in schools is flavored. So that tells you just how much sugar our kids are actually getting just from the dairy products. When people and organizations try to fight against all of this, the lobbyists come back with vague phrases like, and these are literal phrases that they've said, "Cheese can fit into almost any eating plan. Processed cheese is made from natural cheese. Cheese contributes essential nutrients for good health. Studies show that when chocolate milk is not an option in the school meal line, many kids don't drink any milk at all. That means they completely miss out on essential nutrients they need to think, learn, and grow. Chocolate milk is the perfect balance of vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, and protein, a combination that can't be found in any other beverage." What's more important, a small amount of added sugar or missing out completely on a powerful package of nutrients? Literal things they've said that don't make any sense. In 2011 alone, the Dairy Checkoff program helped to sell $7 billion of additional pounds of milk. Now, the government has checkoff programs not only for dairy, but also for sugar and meats and a few other things. But those are the big focus, is the dairy and sugar and meat. They're the money makers, so that's what they work on. They also subsidize the school food programs. The same government also spends significant resources on developing and promoting dietary guidelines to help Americans make better eating choices. I say that with quotations because, yes, the USDA is in charge of the food guidelines, which are updated every 5 years. Currently, they use MyPlate, which has evolved from the food pyramid from when I was a kid. The food pyramid specified servings of different types of foods, and that was actually kind of helpful. But now we have this ambiguous plate that gives you very little understanding of what to eat or why, except clearly you should drink dairy for every meal. And why has it become so unclear? There have actually been protests about what can or can't be included, such as the phrase avoid fatty meats, so that, we're not ending up with heart disease so much. The USDA continuously has to make compromises for the meat industry and the dairy industry, and they have to say things instead such as choose lean meat, even though that phrase didn't result in anything different for the American people. As time goes on, the food guidelines have become more and more ambiguous, resulting in a plate that's just squares and a circle for dairy. And part of the reason for that, like for example, the square protein. All it says is protein. Now, a lot of people don't know where their protein really comes from. And part of the reason that it only says protein instead of something like lean meats is because this time around, they were asked to focus on sustainability. And if you have ever looked into the meat industry, it's not sustainable. For example, it takes 2,000 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef, which is 4 servings, whereas it takes 600 gallons to produce a pound of dry beans, which is 12 servings. Another excellent source of protein, by the way. That's 10 times less water per serving than meat. But due to the USDA meat checkoff programs, they can't focus on the sustainability or health of beans. They literally have a loyalty to meat. These nutritional guidelines have been known throughout the years to be influenced by the agricultural industry and what product they are trying to sell. Excuse me, and the product that they are currently trying the hardest to sell. And here's the funny thing about MyPlate. This is just crazy. In 2013, there was actually a study published in PLOS ONE and Mayo Clinic Proceedings, those are two different journals, showing that the dietary data used to make these diet guidelines were not compatible with human survival. In fact, they hadn't even used any real scientific data at all to create MyPlate. They surveyed Americans to see what they were eating. That's what they did. And in the end, when they came up with the dietary guidelines, the study authors found that a bedridden, frail, elderly woman, so the person with the lowest possible energy requirements, could not survive on the number of calories reported by the average person in the survey that they used. These findings were supported by many previous studies. So, to follow the guidelines set forth by the USDA for nutrition, that would mean that you're not getting enough food for survival. This information was completely ignored in the 2015 dietary guidelines and clearly does not represent current food trends in our society. SSRN.com, which is a website that makes research more available to people, said, USDA and government-funded nutrition researchers routinely manipulate implausible dietary data to create the appearance of plausibility. Such practices include statistical and mathematical adjustments and deletion of implausible data without caveat for the biases introduced via these post hoc manipulations. Here's another one to get into this. Food stamps, the SNAP program. This is used to help families of lower income feed their families, 50% of which are children. There are about 40 million Americans enrolled in this program. When people use this to buy food, there really is an anything goes policy. There is absolutely no regulation about what you can or cannot buy. Large food companies like Kroger, Walmart, Coca-Cola, JP Morgan Chase, Mars, they give money to actually fund this program. Why? They make money from food stamps. There is never any data recorded to show what people buy with food stamps, and the lobbyists for these companies intend to make it stay that way. Because if the public found out what was being bought, they would likely be furious, because people on food stamps are buying soda and sugar and all of those things that really they shouldn't be buying. The US government also protects sugar companies, and it has for almost 100 years. So this relationship isn't going anywhere. In fact, Americans are taxed $1.4 billion a year to help out the candy and sugar industry. Lobbyists pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to keep bills from being passed into legislation regarding food. Now, we all know the threat of salmonella to the human body. It can make us incredibly sick and even kill us. The USDA is known for saying that we have the safest food in the world. In a slaughterhouse for chickens, about 300,000 birds are processed a day. That's 9 million chickens a month. How many of them are actually tested for salmonella? Do you guys know? 5. 5 whole chickens are tested, and there are also 5 tests done on chicken parts. So 5 out of 9 million chickens are tested for salmonella. The USDA says that salmonella is a normal part of raw chicken, when in fact it is not. It's okay in America to knowingly sell chicken contaminated with salmonella. And I find it ironic that we have legislation to regulate diseases in livestock doomed for slaughter, but there is no regulation about diseases that can cause health risks to humans. Now, I could go on and on with examples such as these, and we will touch on some later in this course, but it's a no-brainer that our government, at least the American government, walks a tightrope when it comes to making large companies happy and keeping consumers, healthy enough. For many in the industry, profit is more important than ethics. So what are we to do when the very entities that are supposed to keep us healthy are getting money and giving money to those companies that are feeding us things that are so seriously affecting our health? Who are we supposed to believe? We've got to believe our Father in heaven, because he warned us outright. In D&C 89, verse 4, "Behold, verily thus saith the Lord unto you, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarned you by giving unto you this word of wisdom by revelation." In a world of so much confusion about what diet is the best to follow for this or that, God provided one. And if you follow the science, the true science, it backs it up perfectly. Let's dive into the different things God mentioned and the science behind it.